Now let's take a look at the domain and range of this guy. The farthest left that this guy goes, well, even though it's going up forever, it's also going to the left forever. So the domain of this guy is going to be all real numbers. The range, the lowest this guy goes, is 0, but is it ever going to touch 0? Nope, it's going to get infinitely close, but it's never going to hit. So it's going to go from 0 with an open parentheses all the way up to infinity. So now let's talk about the transformation from the first graph to the second graph. They look pretty similar, but there's something different about them. Our original graph versus our next graph has reflected over the y-axis. So if we take this graph and we go bloop and we flip it over the y-axis, we end up with our new graph. So the transformation is going to be a reflection about the y-axis. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to throw h and k into this. Remember, we've seen h and k before. We've seen it with our lines. We've seen it with parabolas. We've seen it with absolute value functions. So now we're going to do the same thing with our function 2 to the x power. So this is going to move to a new origin at the point h, k. But remember, our original graph didn't go through the origin. It went through the point 0, 1. But what does go through the origin? If our origin is this point 0, 0, that flat line that this graph approaches does. And there's a fancy name for that line that the graph approaches. A line that a graph approaches but never ever touches is called an asymptote. So remember, that line doesn't go through the origin, but the asymptote does. And I misspelled it, of course. Asymptote has an M in there. Asymptote. There we go. All right, so it's called an asymptote. So here we have y equals -2 to the x power. So what's that negative going to do? Anytime we see a negative out in front, it gives us a reflection over the x-axis. And then over here, if we have a negative x, remember up here we did this, we did 2 to the negative x. So if the negative is out in front, it's going to reflect over the x-axis. So it's going to take our graph and it's going to flip it downward. But a negative x is going to take our graph and reflect over the y-axis. All right, so here we go. Let's take a look at number 1. We don't have any negatives in front of the 2, and there's no negative in front of the x, so there's no reflection there, but there is that -1. So that -1, remember, we do the opposite of whatever the h is, so that means we're going to move to the right 1 unit. So I'm going to do our parent graph in orange, and then I'm going to do our graph right here in black. So our parent graph